So welcome everyone. I see you're all coming into the room now that we just started. Thank you so much for being here. It's super exciting. I really enjoyed the last live session that we did on Tuesday. Happy to be back, and we're truly still only kind of getting started. I mean, we've got a lot out there, but we still have another video coming tomorrow as part of the main workshop training. And then we have yet another live session after today happening on Saturday, as well as some more lives, some more training coming to you, as well as enrollment opening for the balanced riding course that is going to begin next week as well. So we've still got a lot of good times ahead. And again, welcome everyone that's jumping in. Just a few names that I see: Barbara and Betsy, Christine, Darcy, Eileen, Helen. So good to see you. A lot of familiar names. We've got some course alumni in here. Hi, Laura. A lot of new names too as well. So what I wanted to start with today, I have another question for you. This again just helps us know that everything's working. Plus, it's just a really fun way to kind of kick off and just get an idea for who's here. So first of all, just a little bit of housekeeping. When I ask this question and you leave your comment, make sure to mark that your comment is going out to everyone. That way everyone can see it, not just us. And the question for today is, what kind of riding do you do? So tell us, are you a hunt seat rider? Are you a dressage rider? We've got a lot of Western riders here. We've got some people that are doing cow work. We've got some Western riders that are pleasure riders. We have some long distance riders. And actually York, who is here co-hosting this event with me, is a long distance rider. So thank you, York, for being here and helping us. And it looks like we've got we've got dressage, show jumping, Lipizzaner mare, some more dressage, pleasure trail rider, trail and obstacles, a little bit of everything. I can totally relate to that. Competitive trail riding, eventing, super fun. So while we're on the topic of different types of riding, I often like to say, when people ask me what discipline do you ride, I usually just say I ride horses, because I have done so many disciplines throughout my life with horses, but also through my career as an instructor and as a trainer. With my training, I started off specializing in problem horses, and I started a lot of young horses. And I started horses, everything from ponies that were going on to be really fancy show ponies in the hunter rings, to starting thoroughbreds for the track, to starting some horses that were going to be trail and pleasure horses. I used to work when I was in high school at several barns that did roping and team penning, and lived in Colorado for a time, which is also where York is tuning in from. And when I was out there, I was really involved in, learn to rope, very basic, but I've been kind of the jack of all trades. Where I went deep in the horse world was the behavior, was really seeking to understand the horse's behavior. How do we relate to horses? What are the foundational principles that apply no matter what discipline we're doing? So I've been kind of the jack of all trades in terms of different disciplines, but my area of depth has really been that behavior piece and the learning, which the learning has been such an incredible area of study for me, because it applies to both. It applies to us as riders, and it also applies, of course, to training and to the horses themselves. So just a little bit of how we're going to proceed on the call today is what I want to do first is go over a big question that has kind of come up again and again in video 2, which just came out yesterday. So video 2 of our main training for the workshop. And in this video, we were talking about the myth of needing to be the boss of the horse. and that it's necessary to be in this leadership role and to be as aggressive as we need to do to make the horse do it. And that's the way that we stay safe, and that's what creates effective riding. And in that video, we talked about how that really is myth, that yes, we do need to sometimes be clear, we need to be assertive at times, but that clarity is different than being aggressive. So we talked about that. And then at the end of the video, I asked the question of, if you could ask your horse something, what would you ask them? And I have loved reading the responses that have been coming in from that. Truly incredible. Some of the most simple questions that can really be the most profound. And one question that has come in again and again in various forms is, I would ask my horse, does he like being with me? I would ask my horse, is he happy with me? Or I would ask my horse, what can I do better? So I just want to share something that, again, I learned working with mustangs, since that's been such a huge part of my journey. I shared a little bit in the last live session that we had together, a little bit about my last year that I was working with the mustangs in California and doing mostly the basic work with them, going from their very first contact with people to wearing a halter, being led, having their feet handled, just the basic skills to either be able to have all their husbandry care done without having to go through the chute systems, or to be adopted out. So I'm going to share that little lesson. And then we have 3 videos today that we're going to be going through. We're going to look at someone that said she's feeling floppy at canter, and I'm sure a lot of you can relate to this. We have another rider that sent in a video of her and her young horse, and this horse is doing some really typical young horse stuff that I think you guys will relate to, and it's kind of connected to this topic in myth too, because often when horses have these kind of behaviors, it is sometimes blamed on, he's being disrespectful, or he's seeing if he can get away with this. So we're going to talk about this a little when we watch that second video. And then we have another one of having using the aids more effectively to help a horse stay on the bit, especially when they are going through that phase of their need to be stronger in their body to have better self-carriage. So those are our topics for today. Then we'll get into questions. We'll go through as many questions as we can in the hour we have together. If you have questions, make sure that you put them in the Q&A. So York is here to help us out with keeping the questions organized. And if you put them in the Q&A for her instead of the chat, it'll be a lot easier for her to monitor those questions. Okay, so let's go ahead and just jump right in. I'm going to revisit what I introduced as that first big topic that I want to talk about. The questions that are coming in of, if I could ask my horse something, I would ask him, do you like being with me? You know, what could I do better? And are you happy when we're together? That being kind of the theme. And something that just kept coming to mind as I was reading and replying to these questions yesterday and this morning was the journey in that early contact with the mustangs. And it's my favorite part was kind of that leading up to like those first touches, but there was so much interaction that happened before that. And I was also talking to someone out in California that adopted 5 of the horses that I trained, and she just got into new ones and is now doing the work with them herself. And she's gotten a little bit stuck at the point of the horses are now getting comfortable with her being around, but not comfortable enough for her to actually touch them. And a big bridge that I found was the horses being comfortable with eating out of a person's hand, with being able to take food from the person, because once you kind of have that interaction, it opens so many doors for there to be even more relationship. And here's the thing, I believe that relationship is built in so many different ways. It begins with just that first part that she's working on right now of just being around the horses, of spending several hours a day, hanging out outside their pen, bringing them the food, filling up their water tubs, walking around, taking care of other horses, and having those little moments of interaction that we all know where you just you have an eye contact, or you move and the horse moves somewhere. Those are all so important. But there was a part with the Mustangs when they started learning that there was something really good, that it wasn't just okay, we can be comfortable together in the same space, but now you can actually give me food. And we can start to have this interaction, that there's kind of this fun game that comes for the food of, oh, if I actually start to move my head and I touch this thing that you're holding, I use targeting a lot starting. If I touch that, now I get some food. And then we went to, if I touch your hand, that was kind of scary at first, touching this weird feeling fleshy thing. If I touch your hand, then I get some food. And it just would start to build from there. But it was so important for every individual horse to see the differences between them and to really honor that difference. With our domestic horses, there's so much that we can rightfully blame on past experiences and sometimes the poor experiences that our horses have had with other people and in past training. And with these horses, it varied. Some have had experience with people in the holding pens or during the roundup process. Many had virtually the same. They'd been rounded up, they'd been put in pens, they'd been in a holding facility, and then they'd come to the sanctuary. And some of those horses would just innately be super curious, and they wanted to interact right away. Like they wanted to be up by the fence. They were nervous, they weren't sure, but they still wanted to be there. And those horses their training would increase pretty quickly. But then there were other horses that were just so much more careful. They really had to, I had to work a little harder to really make that point of, there's going to be something in this for you. Like right now it's food. Later, you're going to learn that these are great scratchers. And then that can be a reinforcement too. But that there was that process of them feeling like, there's something in it for me. And that this is just all part of the relationship building. So it was first just being in the same space. And then it was, I've got something of value to you. And then we can transfer that value to not just food, but me actually touching. And you know what, it can feel good when I touch you. And there can be a fun interaction that's mentally stimulating of you do something and you get a reward. And I just found that was all part of the relationship building process. And I could so easily damage it. All it would take was one day where I was super distracted and I wasn't paying attention to the signs that horse maybe wasn't ready yet for me to go from outside the pen to now I'm going to climb through the fence and be inside the pen. And that sent them spurting off to the other end. We repaired that, but there was a repair process there. And I think that's something that's so important too with our relationship with our horses is they are so forgiving, I find, when we do screw up in allowing that repair, but there is often that conscious, I screwed up, and now I'm going to take a few steps back and repair. And that can be in something like I just described where, I went a little too fast and I scared them, and then I had to build back up the trust of I'm not scary. But it can also happen when maybe we're riding and we ask for something that the horse just isn't ready for. We start asking for flying lead changes. And now we're using a bunch of pressure to try to get that flying lead change, but the horse wasn't prepared for it. And then they start to get tense. And now they're starting to rush through the center of the arena where we've been asking for the change. That's another example of we've got to take a few steps back and go back to, can we do it? Can you come back and do a relaxed transition to trot? Or can you get this change with the pole or the little jump here to help you and build back up? So again, just a little anecdote, if you will, that I was thinking of as I was reading all of the excellent questions that came in on video 2 in our workshop training. Okay, so I am going to, I'm going to jump into the videos, but it always takes me a minute here to get organized and pull up the video. So I want to ask you a question. What is maybe a situation that came to mind as I was just describing my little stories, a situation that came to mind for you that was really a relationship building moment between you and your horse? So a time that you did feel a level of certainty, confidence, or connection of you know what, this feels good for both of us. My horse is showing me that he's enjoying this too. Was it some time where you just found that right itchy spot and they just went, you know, where their lips start moving and their eyes kind of half close and they make that face? Was it a time that maybe you were out for a trail ride and you were out and you just felt your horse walking along and they were so interested, but yet they felt relaxed? What was the time for you? So go ahead and put those in the comments. And I'm going to pull up our first video. And our first video today is going to be from Kathy. We're going to take a look at riding the canter with more stability, stillness. Okay, so I've got my video up here. So when I bring my video up, I lose the chat. But maybe if York, could you just jump in and read off some of the comments that people are leaving here?
All right, so we have a lot of pretty long comments, which is awesome. We have one, someone said their horse started showing me where he wanted to scratch massage. I think he's been trying to tell me for a while, but this time instead of being nervous about what I was doing with his head and neck, I just listened and he started responding. I was so happy.
That's awesome.
We have another who says that her horse calls to acknowledge her when she arrives at the paddock, which is awesome. Another who put her head in her chest to snuggle. My yearling put his head in my arms and closed his eyes.
Oh,
these are all really, really sweet.
Yeah, I love those.
When he hears my voice, he comes into my stall from the outside barn to see me.
That's awesome. Thank you guys for putting your comments in. Love them. I'm excited to go back and read them. All right, so I have our first video up here. We'll change gears a little bit. So just as a refresher before we go into the videos, I said this last time, and again, with our group here, I think it hardly needs to be said. However, be kind in the comments. We're all here to learn. Everyone, including myself, but always has things that we want to improve on our riding. So as we watch these videos, just remember that we've all made mistakes. We're all here to learn, and keep any comments kind and uplifting and encouraging. And the first video that we're going to look at is from Kathy. And when Kathy submitted this video, she said that the feedback she wanted was in this video, she feels floppy, and especially with her hands and her arms. So in the last time that we were together for our online clinic on Tuesday, we looked at several videos where I gave feedback for the riders on their alignment. One rider was bringing their leg back and finding that better alignment from their hip to their ankle. And we also talked about, we talked a little bit about the seat and how we identified our hip joints, and that movement, how that's so important to have fluid movement through our hip joints. What I want to show in this video is the importance of hips as well, but also back. Okay, so I've got it playing for you. Kathy's about to pick up her canter here. So I always like to just give everyone a chance to kind of watch it through, see what ideas come up for you, see what parts of the video you can relate to. I'm going to play it through again. So here's an interesting thing about learning and about learning movement. And this is actually a quote that I included in my workbook for the balanced riding course. The quote was from Todd Hargrove, who is a physical therapist. He's also a Feldenkrais body worker. I'm going to just pause the video here for a moment. And he described the process of learning a new movement skill as paring away excess movement. And he gave the example of, if you think about a baby that's learning to stand or a toddler that's learning to stand, when they first stand up, there's all this extra, they're wobbling around, their arms are going to try to, grab on something or to help to catch their balance. And as they get better and better, that excess movement just starts to become smaller. Soon they can stand without the arms going out and without all of the extra wobbliness. And the same happens for us in our riding. When we're learning a new skill like riding, in the beginning, there's going to be this excess movement. And that's part of the process. And part of the process of learning to ride well is to slowly pare away that excess movement. But the key is to slowly pare it away. Because if we try to just, I've got to stop moving, like I've got to get really tight, I've got to hold my hand still, or I've got to keep my lower leg on my horse so it doesn't swing, then we add so much tension that we become not a very fun rider for the horse to carry, but we also end up then feeling like we're actually moving more, because when we tense and we brace our joints can't have that subtle fluid motion that allows us to go with the horse. So it's so important to remember that learning, there's going to be extra movement and we've got to just gradually pare it away. So here's what I would recommend for Kathy is if we watch again, this is a really common problem that I find a lot of riders, especially hunt seat riders, struggle with, and it is hollowing in the lower back. So there was a fun comment that was going around, that was left in the Facebook group. I was going around our team together that we were all having a good laugh at, because it is how a lot of riding is often taught, is chest out. And the description of this was a little more colorful, but it was chest out, butt out, heels down. And that is quite a rigid, stiff, frankly, locked posture that many riders are taught. Many riders think they have to hold. It kind of feels, depending on your definition of good posture and what you equate that with, it feels like, all right, I'm sitting up, I've got my shoulders back, I've got my heels down, I've got my back arched and tight. So this is posture. It's terrible for riding. And this is a little bit of what's happening here for you, Kathy, not nearly to the extent that I was just describing, but what's happening here is as your shoulders are coming back and the movement from your hips at the canter is slightly more back. So we see kind of this motion with your hips at the canter instead of, as I was talking about last time, instead of being able to see this motion. So I recommended an exercise as we were watching the riders in the first video clinic of reins in one hand and other hand on the back of your saddle. Don't worry, we're going to have demonstration of this in the third video coming out tomorrow. But this is such a good exercise. I use it all the time. I recommend it all the time for students. And I think this is going to be a really good exercise for you as well. What this is going to help you do is bring the top of your pelvis back. So last time we talked about hip joints, we found those. A lot of you said that you actually put your hands up on your pelvis, which is, if you put your hands here kind of at your waist, that's the top of your pelvis. And it's the top of the pelvis that we want to allow to go back. That's the idea of lengthening the back. It's not a pelvic tuck. We also talked about that in the first video and have a demonstration with a rider there. It's not tightening the abs and having a super tight core. It's allowing the top of the pelvis to go back, which allows for lengthened back, more fluidity through the hip joints, and will then allow the motion of the canter to be here instead of this way. So with that, when we get that stability in our seat and in our back, and the classical riding texts talk so much about the importance of the rider's back and of the low back. And it really is this idea of lengthen the low back. So that means like from this position that you're in here, Kathy, let the top of your pelvis come back, that lengthens your lower back. And then from there, you're very stable, that your hands, your arms are going to become still as a result of that stability. So it's not about trying to hold your hand still, but it is actually about changing your seat, changing your back, and that stillness, that better contact will come as a result. So any questions on this first video?
So Callie, first, Pamela asked if you can possibly demonstrate how to move your pelvis on camera.
Unfortunately, I can't. I would have to stand on a chair or something, but we have lots of really good videos that go into this. If you search our blog for canter, there's some free resources there. And they're in the course, in the balanced riding course, we really go into this movement because the canter is something that tends to be a sticky point for a lot of people. And often I find it's just in how it's taught. So when I teach riding the canter, if possible, I will teach it on a horse that even can go into canter from walk. And I have the rider with reins in one hand, the other hand either at their side or on the back of the saddle. I have them lean back a little bit, so actually take their body slightly behind vertical and go into the canter. From there, they learn to, the best I can do for a demonstration is with my hands here. So this is my leg, this is my upper body. Then they learn to go into the canter and have this being the hip joint, where the hip opens. And then from there, we start to bring the upper body to vertical, or then we can even start to come into forward fold. But there's that adjustability in the upper body, the angle of the upper body, depending on what we're doing. Those of you that work and are, say, working cattle, there's often times where you are slightly behind the vertical. You're preparing for the horse to do a fast stop or to really, push in and turn really quickly. You're going to be a little behind the vertical. Our jumper riders going around a course are going to be in front of the vertical, but the lower back is still relatively flat. I say relatively because we're all individuals. We all have different levels of curve, but the back is relatively flat. The muscles are long and lengthened. They're not tense. That's the biggest difference. If your lower back is tense and tight, they're going to be hollow. We want to literally lengthen those muscles, and that allows for better movement. All right, one more question on this video, and then we'll go into the next one.
All right, Margot asks, how would you suggest helping a horse that drops his shoulder at canter to the inside and not staying balanced without micromanagement?
Great question. So I would set up an exercise of riding a square. So what this does is it helps teach the horse to go straight and then turn and go straight. I find that it takes more of this micromanagement, a good word that you used if we're just trying to ride a circle, and help the horse sit up more. But if you ride a square, and you can make the square as big as you need to, like it can be pretty big, almost, your whole arena, you're just turning in instead of going all the way to your shorter sides of the arena. You're making more of a square instead of a rectangle. But the idea is that you ride straight, you turn, you ride straight, you turn. So with the horse that leans, the really important part for supporting them is that we have to stay straight, meaning we have to keep our hips straight. If we're starting to lean in with the horse, it's very hard for them to straighten themselves. So we've got to be sitting straight. Another way that I think of it is feeling hip straight, feeling my knees and my toes straight relatively. We always talk about, again, this is never looking for your toes must be pointed straight forward, because there's this variability for every rider. But speaking in general terms, it's this feeling of everything is straight, my alignment is straight. And then when your horse starts to lean in, you can give that quick aid of a little inside leg, a little lifting of the inside rein to help straighten them out. when you get to your turn, you're going to want to use more of your outside aids to turn. And taking a video of yourself might be really, really beneficial to be able to see visually, am I actually leaning with my horse? And do I need to think more about keeping my weight to the outside, for example, if I have a tendency to lean with them in order to help them maintain that straightness too. All right, I'm sure we have so many more good questions on that video, but I want to make sure we get to our other video submissions. So the next one that we're going to look at is Stacy and her young horse. So just give me a minute to pull this one up. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and play this video and just let you watch this one through. So Stacy asked for feedback on feeling secure on her young horse here. And part of why I wanted to pull this in is with our discussion, of the myth that we need to be the boss with our horses. I find that there's some of the things that this horse is doing, very typical young horse. He's getting a little bit crooked as he's walking around. He's doing some silly things with his head. And there's a lot of times that these kind of things then get blamed on, don't let him do that. He's being disrespectful, or you've got to just show him who's boss and make him go straight. And there's a balance here, because we do need to be clear to help the horse understand what it is that we're asking for. And that's actually the feedback that I'm going to give to Stacy here, is a few exercises that will help with having that really clear aids. This will also help with that last question of the horse that falls in. However, we have to me, it's always the way that I think about it. So even if I have a horse that maybe is frustrating in the sense of they feel like you're riding a slinky or like you're riding a trout, that they're just like all over the place and their body's wiggling around and their head is all over the place. Just thinking about giving them the clear guidance of here's what we're going to do. Of course, it's always a question too of, are they doing this because there's a discomfort somewhere? And then we can look at, are there signs of tension and pain that are with this? Or is it just that they're young or green and they don't really know what to do yet with the weight of a rider on their back, and all of these aids are still kind of new? So it always comes back to just clarity of what we're asking the horse to do and helping them understand is the important part. It's not about being the boss. So the recommendation that I'm going to give here to you, Stacy, is there's a few things that are happening as you're steering. And there, I saw it just, I'm going to bring it back here a little bit because this was the easiest place to point it out. So what's happening here is as you're steering, your hand is dropping and kind of coming in here to your hip. As soon as we block our hand, like as soon as we bring our hand that it's actually into our leg, or that we drop our hand down, we start to lose the fluid motion through our elbow, which is so important. And also what it looks like is happening here a little bit, and this is so common when we have a horse that's tending to drift and we're trying to use more pressure, say on the inside rein to bring them around, is we end up bracing with our inside leg. So it looks like that might be happening a little bit here, that you're pushing just a bit harder on this inside leg as you're pulling with that inside rein. And what that does is it actually pushes the horse even more to the other side. Because, and you can kind of follow along with me in your chair, or you can stand up to do this, but think about if you were standing, you have soft knees, kind of think riding position, and now push on your right foot. As you push on your right foot, where does your weight go? It shifts off to the left. And when we're riding the horse, they need to stay under our weight. And this comes down to part of just the horse wanting to maintain balance as a result of their nervous system saying, we've got to stay in balance, because a main function of our nervous system is don't let us fall. So the horse is going to tend to stay under our weight. So if we push off of our inside leg unconsciously because we're trying to pull harder on that inside rein to steer the horse, and our weight has just gone left, that horse is going to drift even more to the left because they've got to stay under our weight. So here's an exercise that can really help. there's two ways to do this. The best way is to take a crop or a stick and put it under your thumbs. I'm going to use my pen here as an example. Now you want to have your hands that your hands are hip width apart. You wouldn't want to have them this close, obviously, but just showing how it rests under your thumbs. So you would take a crop, place it lightly under your thumbs. What this does is two things. For one, it keeps your hands upright. And two, it keeps your hands together. So it makes it, you can't, get wild and way out to the side with one arm, but also it makes you a lot more aware of if you start to drop one hand, and it limits how much you can drop one hand. This also really helps with a horse like this who's a little wiggly through his body, because it will allow you to use both the indirect and the direct rein. So your direct rein is the one that actually has the direct contact with the mouth. The indirect rein is going to be against the neck. And that really helps. That indirect rein, that outside rein against the neck, really helps to stabilize a wiggly horse. So that's going to be just one thing. The first thing that came up here, watching this video, that I would recommend for you, Stacy, is that simple exercise to keep your hands together. What I like here, what's really good, is your leg looks nice and soft in the saddle. Like I said, when they're steering, it looks like it's getting a little tense on that inside, but as you're walking around, your leg is nice and soft. For the most part, you've got your leg underneath of you, a good alignment. It's not being braced forward into your heels. And from this video, it also looks to me like you've got a nice soft posture through your ankle, or I'm sorry, nice soft through your ankle as well, but through your back. So what I also think that this hand exercise is going to help with is just changing a little bit your upper body. I would be curious if you brought your upper body slightly more forward, if that would actually help you be more in balance. And what I showed in the first video in our training was that test of having someone pull on the reins. And this is truly an invaluable test, because with this, you can make these little changes, and then you can have someone pull on the reins and you can see, where am I most solid? Is it when I come back? Is it if I come just a little forward? Because when we find our functional posture, our best alignment for our body, that's where we're going to be most stable. And when our nervous system feels, oh, I'm in balance, then it can actually calm down. And that's why sometimes even just a change in our alignment in our posture can really help with confidence. Okay, let's do 2 questions on this video before we go to our final video for the day.
All right, first, Jody asks, can you address the role of a strong core during the canter? How do you remain strong in the core without tensing other areas in the back especially?
Such a good question. So this is one of the things that has definitely been kind of a buzzword in riding, is this idea of strong core. And the first is to remember that our core is much more than our abs. So I find a lot when people think strong core, they think, tighten my abs up. And that kind of goes into this pelvic tilt. When we tighten our core this way, it also limits our breathing. We can't breathe fully and deeply. But our core is so much more than just our abs. Our core also is the muscles that go along our spine, which is an intricate system of little muscles along the spine, as well as like our bigger back muscles. And strong core, used in the sense that is helpful, means the stabilizing muscles. It means that our back is stable, and that those stabilizing muscles are strong and efficient. When we interpret strong core as I've got to tighten up my abs and keep everything really tight, does exactly what you said. It makes us stiff. So what I find the difference is in creating stability, like strength in our torso through stability, that comes from movement, that comes from challenging our balance. That's why I love other activities that challenge balance, things like yoga. If you do other sports, basically anything that has a component of balance and body awareness can be really helpful for training our stabilizing systems. Also riding, and just knowing that the more that we ride, and the more that we ride that we're not going so far above our level that we're having to just hang the heck on, will also help to train those stabilizing systems as well. So when I ride the canter, the only time that I really change my core when I'm riding the canter is if I'm asking my horse to come into a more collected frame. And then I'm going to, as I'm asking the horse to come into a more collected frame, one, I'm going to be changing my upper body angle slightly. So I'm going to be bringing my upper body angle up a little bit more. And if I'm riding in a full seat, it's going to be maybe even coming slightly behind the vertical, like 2 or slightly behind. If I'm riding in a forward seat, I'm just going to be opening that angle a little bit more, not even necessarily coming all the way up, just opening. And there's going to be a bit more tone in my core as I do that, as I make that change, and I think hold for a moment as they rock back. But it's never, I never think about tighten my core. I never tell my riders to tighten their core, because when we over focus on one area of the body, like tighten your core, it does what I described in the first video, in Kathy's video. When we try to stop motion by just tightening, then we tense joints that need to still have a degree of motion, and we end up being more stiff and less able to move. So that was kind of a long description, but it's a really, really important one, because it's so taught of, you know, you got to squeeze more with your leg if your lower leg is swinging, or if your upper body is moving too much, you got to tighten that core up and suck your belly button back in. Or if your hands are wiggling around, you've got to keep them really still and, you know, lock your elbows down at your side. And all of this just makes us more stiff. All right, one more. You're still muted.
Sorry about that. This is a clarifying question, I think, from Stacy. If you're riding a horse in a circle that drops the inside shoulder and swings the outside hip outward, with the crop under both thumbs, like you just talked about, where should your hands go, and which leg position helps the horse with more balance and better position?
Awesome. So with a horse that's doing this, where they're dropping the shoulder, and just a teeny little clarification here, which actually is important, because when we really understand what's happening with the horse's body, we can better visualize the change that's needed to correct it. So for a horse that's dropping the shoulder, a horse can't literally drop their shoulder, because the leg is a column. I always like to, you know, mention that our other instructors here at Horse Class, and in Wendy's classes, we look at the skeleton of the horse, and she does an excellent job of going deep into the skeletal system. And this is one of the topics that comes up there. The front leg from hoof up to the shoulder is a column. So they can't literally drop their shoulder. But what happens that creates this sensation is they're leaning. They're essentially rotating through their rib cage and leaning their body. So what we want the horse to do is to stay upright through their body, and then to navigate a turn, there has to be actually like a little bit more bend that happens through the rib cage, instead of them just leaning into the turn. Now, there's times that we want them to lean. If you're doing barrel racing, you want your horse to lean into that turn to go around. If we're riding a 20-meter circle in our dressage test, and we want a really collected canter, we don't want to have any leaning. So the aids that you would use with the crop under your thumbs is having contact on the outside rein. So that's the most important thing, is your weight and your body has to be centered. Your hips have to be centered, meaning you can't be cocked one way or the other with your hips, with your pelvis. Contact on the outside rein. And then the inside leg, when the horse starts to lean, the inside leg needs to come on. This is the important part. When the horse straightens up, when they sit back a little bit more on that outside hind leg, in order to bring their body back straight, you have to release with that inside leg, because this comes down to training. We talked in this part 2 of the workshop about training and negative reinforcement, which is our pressure and release. If we always keep the pressure on, if we always keep our inside leg tight for a horse that tends to drop his shoulder, there's never a release for when he does the right thing and when he comes into a better balance. So soon he's just going to have to learn to ignore that leg. Then we're going to have to squeeze tighter, or we're going to have to start kicking like crazy, because he's gotten desensitized to that level of pressure. So the inside leg comes on, but when the horse does start to bring their weight more up to that, out of that lean position, they straighten up, then we release the pressure. Even if a few strides later, they start to kind of drop again, we do the same thing. And oftentimes these issues are also can be related to maybe we need to go a few steps and help the horse develop strength. So sometimes there's a horse that may be super skilled. He's got the strength. He's leaning because the rider hasn't given him a clear cue, because it's a little bit easier to just kind of lean around the turn because the rider is leaning. There's also cases where the horse is physically not prepared to do what we're asking them to do. And then in those times, it is important to take a step back and to help the horse physically prepare. So this is just a little aside, but this is, I had a really interesting conversation with Caroline, who's the founder of Equitopia. Equitopia is an amazing resource on a lot of the science that's coming out, not only for riding and training, but for horse care. And Caroline did a webinar series and kind of an informal survey, if you will, of what is the definition of a skilled rider. And the answer that she started to get from experienced riders that surprised her was that people thought of a skilled rider as a rider who has the ability to make a horse do something beyond his level. So just let that sink in for a minute. A skilled rider, from the experienced people's perspective, was someone who had the ability to make a horse do something beyond his level. So the amount of training that it takes for the clear understanding and for the physical ability for a horse to really do the things that we ask them to do, it takes a long time. There's a lot of physical preparation, and there's a lot of breaking down the learning steps. Now, as a skilled rider, and I can relate to this as a skilled rider, I can get on a horse and I can sometimes have them look pretty good because I know exactly how to catch the balance, exactly how to, when to use my leg, when to use pressure to keep them in a frame, but they might not have the physical ability and the understanding to keep that frame for a less experienced rider. And that's part of the journey of training, and just something to think about in terms of it's not all just about the skill of how to do it. We also have to ask the question of how can I better prepare my horse to do what I'm asking. And on that, this is going to tie in really well to our last video here. So let me bring up our last video from Kelly. Okay, so this is Kelly's video, and Kelly's question that she wanted feedback on was how to use the aids to better help the horse as they're building muscle to stay in a frame. So I'm going to go ahead and play this one. And again, just take a few moments to watch it here as we play it through the first time. Think about some of the things we've talked about in other videos, see what you notice, see what you can relate to. So first, two things just that I wanted to point out in this video. First is that I love that, Kelly, that you're thinking about this, how do I help my horse move better under saddle? How can I better help them move better and have self-carriage? Because it's the right questions to be asking. So many people don't even think about how the horse is moving, and it is a huge part of our riding. When the horse moves well, not only are they more comfortable to ride, but they also are then more physically prepared to be ridden. They're going to stay sounder longer. They're going to feel more mentally comfortable when they're in good balance when we're riding. And the physical prep, which a big part of that is understanding the frame of the horse, understanding how to help them be this on the aids or on the bit, really just means that they're in good balance and that they're responsive to the rider's aids. You know, we could go more in depth into the definition of what it really looks like, but just as a basic one, that's how to think about it. And it's such an important thing to think about. The other thing that I really like here, Kelly, well, we can even see it here, is that you're not over jamming your heels down. And I mentioned that one because it's such a big one, but you've got a relaxed ankle. To me, it looks like you have the idea of your thigh being on the horse. And why I wanted to bring in this video as well is you give us a great example to look at kind of a different type of posture. So when we looked at Kathy's video in the beginning, Kathy, you know, for you, I was recommending lengthen your lower back, maybe even bring your upper body just a little bit, or no, sorry, that was the second one, but yours was lengthening the lower back and having more fluidity through your hips. And for Kelly, for you, I'm actually going to recommend, first thing would be thinking about organizing your upper body. So when we watch here, you can see as you're using a lot of contact and hand and rein pressure to try to bring your horse into frame, the amount of work that you're having to do there is starting to kind of collapse your chest in a little bit and roll your shoulders forward. So what would often happen, Kelly, in your case, is someone might say, pull your shoulders back. But if you pull your shoulders back using tightness in your back and all that tension, then you might end up with the opposite problem of now you're just too tight. So instead, we went through this little fix in a demonstration of it in the first video as well. But think about just bringing your sternum, the front of your rib cage, forward. Not up, but forward. Forward in a way that expands your rib cage. As you bring your sternum forward, it allows your shoulders to slide back. That's going to help better organize your upper body. That then once again, your shoulders, your elbows, your hands can be more free. The other thing to think about here is that, to me, let me start from the beginning. I would begin by just getting, here's the training of the horse part. I would begin by just getting more free forward movement and teaching your horse first to drop their head from contact of the bit to they drop their head with a long neck and with the nose going out. So the first thing that we want to get, I'm going to just pause here, when we're starting to train movement self-carriage frame, is we've got to get forward movement and rhythm. This is kind of that classical training scale. And we talk about this a lot in the 5th module of the course. You know, after we build these foundation and our posture, basic aids for the horse, we start getting into movement. We want the horse to be moving forward and with rhythm. And we want to start to then have the aid of bit pressure means I lengthen my neck. So I lengthen my neck. Part of that lengthening the neck is actually opening at the throat latch, not bringing the nose in and closing, but opening the throat latch. And here's the thing, obviously our anatomy is different from our horses, but we can kind of get a sense of it moving in our own body. So our throat latch would be right here. So what I want you to do is pull your chin in and then think about shortening your neck. Like if you kind of pulled your chin in and brought your neck down. So first, how comfortable is this posture? If you were then to start moving around, I feel a little bit like a Frankenstein. Not a lot of movement. Everything's kind of tight and locked. Now open this angle. So lift your chin, lengthen, think about lengthening your neck. Notice what that does to your back between your shoulders, to your upper back. That relates to the withers of the horse. As you lengthen your neck, you've just lengthened through there. So now you've freed up. If you were a horse, you just lifted your withers, lifted your back. And notice the difference just in how it feels just standing or sitting as you went through that. Here's short neck and head pulled in. Here's head going out and neck lengthening. So this is why I would start with just forward movement, a little more forward and free movement. Get the neck, the neck lengthening with the nose actually going out a bit. And then once you're there, you start to think about slowly being able to bring the horse back, getting the hind leg underneath of them, building up the strength of the hind leg, and coming into frame that way. When we try to just hold and put the horse into frame, we end up with stiffness, and we end up with kind of a false frame that they're not really moving well and moving freely. So in the beginning, it might seem more long because it doesn't give us that quick, okay, he's, his head and his neck's down and he looks kind of okay. But in the long run, so much farther ahead to really train this good movement that the horse is able to really do it on their own, if that makes sense. So I think that you are going to be a lovely pair here, Kelly. You've got a good foundation for your riding, and I hope this really helps. So questions?
Mindy asks, bringing the chest forward, not up, so slightly lean forward and lengthen upward.
So if you put your hand here on your sternum, center of your rib cage, and then just think about bringing that, and it's slightly forward. If you go like this, you've gone too much. So it's just slightly forward. You should feel your rib cage expanding. Many times, especially in our riding, but even just in a lot of times how we think about posture is we think just up. So we just hinge in our back. Our rib cage actually has so many joints because there's where each of our ribs attaches into our spine, but then there's also where the bone goes into the cartilage. I mean, there's a lot of movement that happens through our rib cage that we can access more. And as we expand more through our rib cage, it really helps us be more stable and balanced. And it allows our shoulders to hang, that we end up with this, really excellent posture, but without having to use muscular tension to hold ourselves there.
Awesome. And then Kelly asks, he can get really wiggly and distracted and spooky on a longer rein and less contact. When you say let his head stretch forward, are you still working contact there?
That's an awesome question. So I would, this I would say depends on the horse. I mean, really, when I'm starting from a young horse, I'm not working contact there. I'm first getting them that they're just riding forward. I take rein pressure. As soon as they stretch, I go back to zero pressure, to a little bit of a loop in the rein. And then I start to hold just a little bit more. So then I'm actually shaping that they're pressing into that contact slightly, and then I'm softening. And then soon, as they get comfortable with holding that little bit of pressure, then we've got contact, but then we've got contact where it's coming from both, meaning I'm meeting the contact with my hand, and the horse is also creating the contact because they're reaching forward into it. And those are, when you're riding a horse that's seeking the contact, if you've heard that term, you ride a horse that's reaching into it, they're keeping their neck lengthened. So even at the highest levels of deep collection, they're still lengthening the neck into the contact if it's there, or into a loose rein if they're just in self-carriage at that time. But it's starting there. And I have a feeling, to go back more directly to your question, Kelly, of that he gets wiggly and distracted, I would probably start with even just on a circle. So a 20-meter circle, making your space just a bit smaller. And you might need to, because he's already kind of had this experience the other way, you might need to support a little bit more with the rein, but see if you can start to actually shape the other way, that he's doing this circle and you can start to go on a loose rein that he maintains, just stretching and really moving freely forward. You could also, this is where lunging and the groundwork can also come in to develop this as well.
Excellent. And then we had several people ask about this, so I'm going to ask a compounded question of them. Karen asks, sometimes when my horse is learning a new thing, he doesn't want to go forward. Megan mentions that her horse often does a dead stop, even when she's trying to ask him to go forward. Monica says she has difficulty going forward and her horse walks slowly sometimes and doesn't keep the gait. And Janice as well has had trouble with her horse stopping going forward. And they all would like to know what's a good way to encourage their horse to go forward, especially when they're learning a new thing.
Awesome. So there's always a few things that I look at with horses not going forward. The first one is, does the tack fit? Because if the saddle doesn't fit and it hurts when the horse moves, they don't want to go forward. We also have to remember, the more forward a horse goes, now they've got more movement in their shoulder. For example, a lot of horses learn to protect themselves with just a little tiny trot, because if they really start to reach in that trot, now they're feeling a saddle that doesn't allow them to do that. So always look at the fit of the equipment first. The second is to then consider yourself as the rider. We can get in the way of our horses if we're doing kind of any of the stuff we've been discussing in the first part of the workshop, or in the feedback on these videos. If you're braced through your body, if you're holding a lot of tension, it's also not very comfortable for the horse to go forward. Some of it is mental as well. And this is usually more applicable when we're talking about higher gaits, going into a bigger trot or picking up the canter. Because if we're saying, I want my horse to canter, but yet our body is saying, oh, I really don't want to canter, and we're kind of, getting a little tight, the horse can feel that, and they're probably also not going to want to go forward from that. So I always look at, what are the things that we can take care of that are kind of unrelated to the horse's behavior, in the sense of, if we just get rid of those, sometimes all of a sudden we have a forward horse. There actually have been lots of times as a trainer that I have come in to work with a horse that, didn't want to go. And I noticed that they moved forward really freely in their pasture or on a lunge line. So we tried a different saddle, and then they were forward under saddle. Or we changed the rider's position, and all of a sudden the horse was forward. If it truly is a training thing, which can totally be true, I have school horses that I know their tack is comfortable for them. We know how to put riders in good positions, but they're school horses. So they have just learned that I don't really have to go forward. Maybe I won't. And for those, it's usually it's the consistency in the aids. And the consistency is that pressure and release, that when I ask the horse to go, whether it's with my leg, whether it's with tapping with a whip, when the horse goes forward, I've got to release that pressure. Even if it's just for a moment, I've got to release the pressure. They slow down again. I ask them to go forward again. I release again. So it's the consistency in that. And then the final little thing that I will say is, there are times where it is helpful to sensitize a horse to the aids. So if they've become desensitized, this happens with the school horses, something that sensitizes to the aids, that kind of wakes them up, can be really helpful in then having more responsiveness. So I will always remember when I took a lesson with an Italian instructor who was working at the riding school in Portugal, when I did a little study time there, is that she used the expression of the electric leg. And it was just such a good expression. And she did such a good job of describing and of using it herself, because she could, she would put her leg on just like one quick time, but it's coming off that actually allowed the horse to go forward. Meaning she would put her leg on really tight, and then there would be a total release of the tension. So it was kind of a quick like, hey, and then it was gone. And the benefit of that was just what I was saying. It was kind of to the nervous system. It was sensitizing. When we talk in training theory, it was sensitizing to, this is the aids, we're doing something. And then from there, the horse would usually then start to work off of more subtle, small movements. Okay, we are just over the hour, so let's take one more question, and then I'll give a quick recap of what to expect through the workshop coming up in the next few days, and then we'll close out the call.
Excellent. So MG asked, why is it so hard to trot to the left, but it's so easy to trot to the right?
So I would say, is it difficult for you to trot to was it the left that was easier?
Hard to trot to the left, easy to trot to the right.
Okay. Is it easier to the right on all horses for you, or is it on one horse? This could be a really simple way to determine, are you a little crooked or is the horse a little crooked? So we all, humans and horses, have asymmetry in our body. And when we can be aware of it, we can not only help to improve it through typically other exercises, again, going back to that like yoga, specific movements that help to develop more symmetry for us as the rider. If it's us, if we're noticing it on multiple horses, it's probably an asymmetry for you. And if it's on one particular horse, then I would work on that for that horse. And my favorite is typically going to in-hand work when I've got a horse that's really asymmetrical, because the in-hand work is so beneficial for diagnosing. And when I say diagnosing, I don't mean saying like, here is the specific physical problem, but diagnosing where the horse is maybe holding tension and helping them work through that.
Excellent. And she does say it's all horses.
All horses. Okay. Yeah. Then I would start being really aware of your body and notice, where do you hold tension? Do you have an old injury somewhere? And look at working through some of that. Thank you so much for everyone joining us here on this live session. So tomorrow, the third part of the workshop is coming out. What we will be discussing on this third part of the training is the myth of grit your teeth and ride through it, or just get back on the horse. So we're going to be talking about mindset to begin with, but then I'm going to apply that to specific exercises. And actually, several of the specific exercises are ones that we've been talking about here as we're doing these live video clinics. So I think, for those of you that have been joining in here, make sure you watch tomorrow's training. It's going to be super helpful in going a little deeper on what we've been discussing and giving you the visuals for that. But we're also going to be talking about fear, how to recognize what your comfort zone is, how to know the difference between challenging yourself for improvement and challenging yourself in a way that might actually make any anxiety that you're feeling worse. So that's tomorrow's training. Saturday, same time, 12 p.m. Eastern, we'll have another live video clinic like this one. And then next week, we will be opening enrollment for the balanced riding course. I'm super excited. Again, the whole course is brand new. I rewrote the entire workbook. We've just got some really cool stuff for you there. So just keep an eye on your email. I will be telling you all about that. And thank you so much for joining in here.
Bye, everyone.